welcome to another episode of Listen to Daddy. I'm your co-host, Daddy Rod.
And I'm your co-host, Daddy Rob.
And for those of us who may be joining us for the first time, if you've heard the wonderful things about our lovely podcast, this is the podcast by, for, and about older gay men, where we talk about issues that are of importance and concern for us. And we want to thank you, no matter who you are or where you're joining us from. We're very happy that you're joining us.
And I would like to point out that I have kept my commitment to Daddy Rod by wearing the Resist t-shirt, which I'm going to do every podcast this year. See what that does. But the message is, if you got the energy, then you got work to do.
Yes. And Rob, thank you for bringing that up. And for those of you who may not have caught our last episode, where we talked about the fallout from and the call to action following our last election, I'll be nice and call it an election. One of the things I did ask Rob, because he wore this really wonderful and is still wearing this Resist t-shirt.
I have not taken it off.
There's going to be a lot of work for us to do, as he said. So, Rob, thank you for doing that. And I promise by our next episode, I'll have my own Resist t-shirt.
Cool.
All right. So
what's our topic for today?
If you are still with us, and we hope that you are, we have a very exciting guest. We are happy to introduce Mr. Michael Mele, who is the co-creator of the Gay Men and the Art of Aging Gracefully workshop that is happening in, I believe it is January of 2025, and happens every January. So we want February. Thank you for that. So that's right, because we're hoping to air this in January. So thank you for the correction. Again, I am a man of a certain age, so you know that memory thing. It is real. So actually, without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome. Well, I did introduce. I'd like to welcome Michael to our podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming aboard this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. So we want to get started. So a little bit of background. I learned about the Gay Men and the Art of Aging Gracefully retreat because my partner, my baby, the love of my life, and he's going to look at me all kinds of weird ways when he sees this. And I said all of that. Damon Jacobs actually attended and presented at the retreat last year. And he really came back with glowing feedback, with just talking so much about the retreat that not only has he asked me and really encouraged me to go, but in talking with you, and he encouraged us to have a conversation. And in talking to you, I realized you're bringing up and touching on a lot of things that I think would be great, not only for people to know about, but for us to talk about as part of this podcast. So if you don't mind, Michael, and because, again, I'm a man of a certain age, I got to put these sometimes I say bad boys, but they really are good boys, I wanted to ask you, the first question is if you could talk about the retreat itself, if you could talk about Gay Men and the Art of Aging Gracefully, and what prompted the idea of a retreat specifically for older gay men.
Yes, I think it's a very important topic. The older I get, the more I realize that it's an important topic to discuss with other people, because we sometimes can live in a vacuum and we see all these things happening to us as we age. But by discussing it in a retreat setting, it becomes much more powerful. So this came about because I have worked with Don Shuey, the co-facilitator, for many years doing programs with gay men. They used to be called Come to Your Senses. We did most of them in Italy, and we had been talking for a while about what was happening to ourselves as we were getting older. And we just thought that it would be a very important topic to discuss with other men. To do the same formula we had done before with Come to Your Senses in Italy, but to do it with older gay men who wanted to talk about aging And I added the part about aging gracefully, because we don't want to just talk about the clumsiness of aging. We want to talk about encouraging one another to age in a positive way. It's important that these workshops, these retreats, happen in a place that is not your home. And that's why we chose Mexico. I had been going to Mexico with Don for a couple of years when we decided, well, this is a nice place to be in January and February because it's warm and it's winter up north where we're both from. So let's try to do a retreat in this warm winter getaway. And we chose Merida because it is an extremely friendly, gay-friendly place, especially for gay expats, gay couples, older gay couples, we noticed. They seem to be drawn, for whatever reason, to Merida. It is like Palm Springs was maybe 50 years ago. Gay men are discovering it. It's a bit of a secret to a lot of people. A lot of people, when you talk about Merida, they don't know it. But it is a large city in Mexico, and it is a safe city. And I always like to say there are so many gay men there that you can't swing a dead cat without hitting one.
Now, you said this your first conference was last year.
Yes, but it's important to do a retreat like this in outside of your comfort zone. Outside of your comfort zone means in a place where you're not familiar maybe with the money, you're not familiar with the language, you're not familiar with the food, and what happens is it makes you more vulnerable. It makes you more expressive. And if you bring a group of 8 men into that environment and you start introducing topics that you know they're all interested in discussing, all of a sudden all the day-to-day issues seem to drop away and people start to open up and start talking about what issues concern them. And ironically, we never know where it's going to go. It's a broad topic, gay men in the art of aging gracefully. There are many topics that could be included. We let the group kind of lead the discussion, and it goes in many, many different directions.
So you can
go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so last year was your first conference, correct?
The first one of this topic, right.
Right.
Again, we had done the other ones with gay men and come to your senses before that.
Well, I'm a little curious logistically as far as when you go to start something like this, because Daddy Rod and I are very big on being part of the solution. So, and it sounds like this is very much along that line of, finding an area where gay men need to be encouraged or propped up because, the world. But I'm curious as far as when you started this, how did you get interest in it enough to be able to have in Merida this conference? And about how many people did you have this past year?
8. We're limited by the size of the venue that we go to.
Well, 8's still respectable if people are getting a message that they need to hear. But so these eight men that you got to attend, are these people who you've developed a relationship with in other areas, or I'm just trying to gauge what the hunger is, or how somebody would find out about this in order to kind of sign up and go.
Right. So there's 2 questions there. And the first one, I like your word of the hunger. And I have talked to a lot of men who are in my same cohort. And I noticed over the last few years, a lot of our community is dispersing and people are moving to different places and health issues and everything else. And these topics kept coming up over and over and over again. And when I realized that, I suggested to Don that maybe there was a need to have a retreat in this, because it seemed to me that there was a lot of interest in it without people being very forward in saying, we need to talk about this. But whenever you were with them at a dinner party or just having lunch together, that was the topic that was coming up with all of my friends who are older, aging with me. And so I knew there was a need and a want for it. The next question that you asked was the important one. How would we interest other gay men to come away to Mexico and spend a week talking about this topic? So we started first with all the alumni of the 10 years of doing the Come to Your Senses programs. Most of those people were older now. And so we pitched it to them, and several of them came last year. And then Don Shuey is very well tied into the community of mental health, of the gay world. And so he also put it out to the people who he knew, and I did as well. And so we kind of put it out to all of the different communities that we had overlapping, and we had enough people who said, yeah, I want to come.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened this year. Some people had heard about it from last year. Some people's friends from last year came, and they said their friend enjoyed it, they wanted to come. Daddy Rod was going to come because he had heard about it from Damon. So it happens by word of mouth, even by Instagram. There is an interest in it.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, go ahead, Rod.
Yeah, and hopefully our podcast will help increase the interest in the retreat as well. Yeah, and speaking of the retreat, something you said earlier about topics that are often addressed. I'm just curious, what would you say are the issues that the attendees tend to talk about and especially since you've been doing Aging Gracefully, what are the topics that the attendees have been bringing up, have been wanting to talk about?
Okay, there are several, and I put out a survey in advance to see what people are thinking about. And some of the things that seem to resonate the most are not only building community, but maintaining community. Mm-hmm. And in that is avoiding isolation. You would think that healthcare was a big issue. You would think that financial topics would be a big issue. They're not as important to many of the people who have been coming recently that as maintaining their sex life, trying to navigate social media. These are big issues. Determining where to live as they get older.
And do you see these issues as specific to gay men as they age, as opposed to a heteronormative populace?
I do, yes. And I think that as the people in the retreat and the community in general start thinking about it, we realize that we're different than those other communities. We're different because we don't necessarily have the biological families surrounding us. We don't have children. And not to say that your children are going to take care of you and solve everything as you get older.
Oh, God, no.
But by and large, gay men don't have children. And so we need to find other ways that we're going to be taken care of as we get older. Or we need to find other people to guide us through our old age. Our community will help us to a point, but if the whole community is aging, who's helping whom? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I do think that the gay community, especially the gay male community, is distinct in relation to other communities in our social fabric.
Yeah, I'm a clinical therapist, and I'm working with the queer population in therapy. There seems to be a lot of challenge with socialization in general because there's a distrust as you're coming up. The whole process of coming out and worrying about who's going to accept you and who isn't. You kind of ostracize yourself before anybody else can do it. And then when you're in a community, you're used to not being a part of something, so it can become very uncomfortable to feel part of the tribe that we keep talking about. And I'm wondering how much of it, in your experience of talking to participants or just people in general, how much of it is that gay men are just more challenged to figure out how to be social as opposed to worrying about being left alone because heterosexual people, for the most part, have that built-in family protection.
I think that's a very important topic, and I think that the gay male community has defined itself pretty well up to a certain point. We've defined ourselves, as you said, about how to come out. There are many topics around coming out in a healthy way. We have figured out that we're very sexual beings. And I think the definition of the gay community stops at a certain point of development. And the concept of the gay male community is something that fits very well if you're in your 30s and 40s, doesn't fit as well when you're in your 50s and 60s and 70s, because we're no longer driven by how we look. We're no longer driven by going to the gym. We're no longer driven by how many guys we can have sex with. And we're definitely not driven by all of those apps that seem to define gay life for a big swath of the community. So we're different, and it's important. I think we feel it in our bones, but until we start talking about it among ourselves, we're never going to feel healthy about where we are.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. It's funny. Wow. I'm going to process that a lot when we're done with this. When we're done with this particular podcast, I want to switch gears just a little bit. And I know Rob talked about his background in clinical health. My background is in HIV and STI prevention, in that arm of public health. So and if we can talk about health in general, and I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of that health does not seem to be like one of the big issues for people who are for the guys who are coming on the retreat. But I was also curious, if health is an issue, what forms of health do come up? Physical health, around mental health, sexual health. Do people talk about HIV? Do people talk about heart issues? Do people talk about prostate?
Prostate.
Okay.
Prostate. Everybody wants to talk about prostate.
Okay.
Because everybody, after a certain age, starts confronting issues with their prostate. It is rare that you come across an older gay man who has not had some issue with his prostate. And these are things to deal with, because for gay men, again, your prostate defines you in more ways than you want to realize, and definitely in more ways than for the straight male community. And so when there are issues with your prostate, it's important for you to mentally and psychologically deal with what all of that means.
And since you brought up the straight male community, what do you see are the differences around the importance of prostate health and prostate important to our identity for gay men as opposed to straight men?
Well, this is only from my perspective, but I think that straight men almost want to ignore the fact that they have a prostate. They're not interested in the erogenous zone of the prostate, like a gay man is. And so I think a lot of straight men would rather not have much interaction with their prostate, whereas for gay men it can become central to not only your sex life but your identity. So that when an issue happens with your prostate, it affects more than just the health of that organ.
That's
So
an
at the
interesting
risk
point.
also of sounding heteronormative, taking a cue from you, Rob,
Yeah.
do you find there's a difference between the bottom and the versatile men in our community among gay men versus the top men who are primarily or strictly tops, again, when it comes to prostate health and awareness?
I don't know that I'm qualified to say that. I don't know that I have enough information about that. I can't really say that. I would guess that there is a difference.
Okay.
But I can't say that.
Well, I mean, there's the whole concept of becoming more difficult to sustain an erection the older you get, not a lot of times because of the prostate. So if there's a lot of misogyny just even within the gay community, as evidenced by like bottom shaming. So the top is the masculine power and the bottom is the passive, more feminine side. So the harder it is to get hard, the more challenging it is to maintain your masculinity without having something else to fall back on. And I love what you were saying. I hadn't really thought about this. I guess in the sense that I had, the fact that the only thing that defines a gay man is their sexual attraction to members of the same gender. So if that's what it means to be a gay man, it makes perfect sense that there would be some stress if there were prostate issues or an inability to perform, and that in the heteronormative world, the masculinity is shown by that straight guy with all the power, which is, we have kind of the top in the gay parlance who plays that role. And if he's having prostate issues and having difficulty getting an erection, then his masculinity could be called into question. So he's got more pressure on him to perform. Whereas in the straight community, their big thing is like traditions and what it is to be a generational person, like a Piaget who talks about these cycles of life. When you're elderly, he says that your focus is on your legacy, what you're leaving behind in the world. But a lot of gay men at that age are still very active sexually and very active energetically in getting out. So what you're saying makes perfect sense when it comes to the challenges that gay men may be having when they get older, because they're having to forge their own path, but the only path they have is the sex path.
Right. And if I can say this coherently, our older gay men having a lot of sex and looking for a lot of sex because that is wrapped up in what our identity is? Or is it because that's what they really want to be doing? I have a friend who says, I would like to talk to this group or any other group to try to get men to admit that their drive for sexuality is not the same as it was. But the identity is telling them that they have to show that they still are having the same drive for their sex. I don't know if I'm saying this properly or if you're understanding what I'm saying.
No, you most certainly are. And what I love about what you're doing, or what I love about what Daddy Rod and I are doing, is even though we want people to have sex positive lives, the emphasis isn't just on sex. And the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing is kind of tied into what I was saying before about legacy. Like, what do you want to leave behind? And we're wanting to educate people so that they can live their best lives. And if their best lives is sex, great. But it's just a reminder that there are other options, that you can have dinner parties and actually talk about things that don't have anything to do with sex.
That's right. I like your talk about legacy. I don't ever remember in the gay communities that I was in anybody ever talking about their legacy. But should we be? Should we be talking about what we're leaving to the younger generation of gay people? Because nobody left it for us. Nobody left it for us. We're kind of forging the path on our own.
And part of that, again, we lost a generation of older gay men through HIV, and to other things related to that as well. So this is new territory, and that's why we have not, until now, had that question about legacy. But I wanted to ask you, Michael, we're already talking about some deep stuff that in most conversations we don't talk about. How do you, in the days of the retreat, create the comfort level so that your participants, your community, can feel comfortable talking about these issues?
That's a good question. And I have to say that Don Shuey, who's the facilitator, really works on that. And so we have rituals. On the very first day, we have a ritual so that everybody feels comfortable with one another. We tell people that don't worry about what clothing you're wearing. Just be comfortable in whatever you want to wear. Every day we do breathing exercises. I always do stretching exercise just to get people to feel comfortable enough physically and in the space where we are, everybody understands. The guy next to them is being very vulnerable when he speaks. And when everybody understands the vulnerability that's happening all around them, then a certain energy happens and people begin to get more comfortable. And I won't say that it happens on day one. It may not be until day 3 that people start really letting go of those barriers.
I like that. I appreciate that. I do have another question for you, but I wanted to ask Rob if he wanted to kind of weigh in on something before I ask my next question.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So since the title of your retreat is Gay Men and the Art of Aging Gracefully, in your opinion, what is the art of aging gracefully, specifically as it relates to us as gay men?
I think anytime you talk about art, what you're really talking about is intention.
Mm.
Art is not just scribbling on a wall. Art is doing that with some kind of intention. And I think that the essence of what this workshop is to grow old with some intention behind it. Don't just let it happen to you. Don't let other people define how you're going to grow older. Bring your own intention, your own art form to your aging process.
I love that.
Wow.
Have you? I mean, I know it's a really big thing in the younger gay community, but are you seeing people, septuagenarians or octogenarians or anybody, older gay men who are still in that Peter Pan syndrome? That's
yes,
not exactly aging gracefully, but just denying aging.
Right. I do too much.
So how does?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if I can piggyback off of that, so how does the retreat, I should say, really help us, ground us into not longing to be young or stay young in that mindset, but also to really embrace aging, even if it's a youthful approach to aging? How does the retreat help us make that shift?
Well, that's a tough thing to embrace because aging is somebody nobody wants to happen to them. But you do have to embrace it because otherwise you're not approaching it in a healthy way. If you have denial constantly, if you're constantly physically trying to be something that you're not, then you're every single day of your life is failure. So we need to be honest about where we are in our lifespan and what's behind us and what's ahead of us. I think honesty is the most important thing, to encourage people to be honest about who and where you are.
So that brings up for me a question that I said I was going to ask you. You are 71 years old. And again, the first time you told me that, I'm going to do what I did before. So, and just kind of as an aside, so I learned of you, as I said earlier at the top of the podcast, from my partner Damon Jacobs, and he showed me the tub talk that you did with him, and my first thought was, "Oh wow, he's a handsome man." That was my thought. Yes. So it's good to see you face to face again. But being that you're 71 years old, what does it mean for you, talking about embracing aging? What does it mean for you to be 71?
Well, I'm not sure I even know myself, but I kind of enjoy being 71 because when I'm on the subway, I know I don't have to get up and give my seat to anybody else. I know that I don't always have to say, yes, I'll do that. I know that I can pick and choose what I want to do and where I want to do it. I don't want to become a curmudgeon, and I don't want to be somebody who says, no, I don't want that. But I don't feel compelled to please everyone or take advantage of every I like that about being the age that I am. I like being healthy at this age, and I like being vibrant and energetic and active. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm married. I'm partnered in a very healthy relationship, and I feel like we're experiencing this age, and we're the same age. We're experiencing growing older together, and to me, that makes it more of an adventure than something that I'm afraid of. So yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm not going to change that. I'm not going to do anything else about it. So enjoy it for what it is.
I love that, because they say that, like with traditional heteronormative marriages, that the man is always the one that benefits from them because he lives longer, where a woman benefits more from being single. Because she lives longer, or single women live longer than married women do. And I love the fact that if you can get two gay men to commit to each other on that level, and however you define marriage, but having that person who you can walk down that path with, it improves both of your lives. And I love that message.
Yeah, I think it's true for me, certainly.
Yeah, I'm glad.
And how long have you been married?
15 years married, 20 years together.
Congratulations. Yeah, yes. I keep telling my clients that we're all, nobody has reached their destination. We're all in the process of becoming, whatever that thing is that we're becoming. And I think that, you talk about the vibrancy. The most vibrant people I see, no matter what age, are the people who still feel that there's something that they have to learn, that they are not complete, that there's another piece of the puzzle they haven't found yet, and they want to find it, and that keeps them moving on forward boldly, as opposed to people who are wanting to hold on to a moment and never letting it go, and they're stuck in that moment until they decay. And I think that you're effectively being a teacher with these conferences, and teachers need to know what that sense of wonder is in order to have that passion to teach. So I love the fact that this is something that you're doing for, as we say, men of a certain age, but particularly gay men of a certain age, who probably need that a little more than anybody else does.
I think that's very true, and I think we are a little bit more invisible than the rest of the population. So we do need it a little bit more. And, gay men are men, first and foremost. Mm. And I have found that one of the characteristics of males, is that we don't talk a lot. We don't express what we think, what we feel. And so a lot of stuff goes under by the wayside. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that we need to express. We need to talk about. We need to talk about it with other people who are feeling the same thing. And maybe with the heteronormative community, there is enough in society that reinforces where they're going in their aging process, but it's not true in the gay community. We don't have all of those positive reinforcements or things that reflect who we are, just in the normal population. So I think we need to talk about it amongst ourselves. We need to talk.
Yeah, and hearing people talk encourages us to talk. So that's the wonderful thing about conferences like yours, is that it gives you go to it and somebody gets courageous enough to tell their story, which inspires somebody else to tell theirs, and all of a sudden people are talking about their truths instead of playing, like you said, playing that role. The fact that it takes 3 days before the majority of attendees just kind of let that go tells you something about how deeply ingrained it is that we still feel we need to perform, even when we're going to a conference about not performing.
Right. So I want to just paint the picture of the retreat a little bit better. It's not 8 hours a day of sitting around in a group talking about these things. We intersperse it with also things where you're having fun.
Oh, good. Talk about
So we go out every other day. We go on an excursion to an archaeological dig, or we go and do a Mexican cooking class, or we tour a mansion or something like that. So we try to build those things in as well.
I love that.
I love it too.
Fully rounded.
So it's definitely on my bucket list. And I'll put it like that. Michael, I know you and I will continue to have conversations about that.
Like one message that you think every gay man your age really needs to hear and let sink in. I mean, what the challenge that you see gay men face over and over again, and if they would just consider this one thing, they might save themselves a whole lot of trouble. Do you have anything like that that would be that nugget of wisdom that would be a shortcut?
Well, I think it may apply to all people who are aging, but the biggest thing is to fight isolation. Isolation happens easily, and the older you get, the more easily it happens.
Yeah.
Fight isolation, because with isolation, your life starts to lose its meaning.
That is some sound and wonderful advice, and thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And I have one question before we wrap up. So don't be scared. Don't be scared. We talked a lot about younger gay and bisexual men, I want to add. How we may not have had people before us to talk to us about aging or whatever. So I'd like you at 71 to think about your 25-year-old self. If you could talk to your 25-year-old self now, what would you tell him?
I would tell him to think of what things really matter, and most of the things that are making you spin your wheels are not the important things of life. Take a step back as often as you can and look at the bigger picture.
Here's full of great advice. Stop it.
Yeah.
Gotta give us something to talk about. You got all the answers.
If we're getting all this good stuff in about a 40-minute to hour-long conversation, I can only imagine what comes out at those retreats.
If somebody is interested in the conference or any of the things that you're doing, what's the website? What's the socials? Where do they need to go to get more information?
The website is www.ilchiostro.com, and you might need to write that out for people.
But we'll definitely
and
put
they
it in the,
can click on that, and they should contact me through the website, and I can answer all of their questions.
So again, Michael, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for giving us this time and sharing with us about your retreat, Gay Men and the Art of Aging Gracefully.
Amen.
And again, we will have the information. Hopefully we'll be able to put it on the screen. And definitely in addition to on the screen of the recording, we'll also have it as part of the write-up when we post it to YouTube as well. So again, thank you for giving both of us and all of our listeners just so many things to think about.
And keep up the great work.
Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to have the discussion. And again, it's not just me. These retreats form themselves out of who is present.
Wonderful.
So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And on that note, we want to say thank you to our viewers, and we want to wish you a pleasant evening. And again, I am Daddy Rod.
And I'm Daddy Rob.
And we're going to try this again. And as always, listen
to
Daddy.
Daddy.
It hurts.